Sweet milk alone, it is estimated that the monthly sales in three northern cities, New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, amount to a greater sum than the marketable value of all the rosin, tar, pitch, and turpentine annually produced in the southern states. Our effort to obtain reliable information respecting another very important branch of profitable industry, the lumber business, has also proved unavailing, and we are left to conjecture as to the amount of revenue annually derived from it in the two grand divisions of our country. The person whose curiosity prompts him to take an account of the immense piles of northern lumber now lying on the wharves and houseless lots in Baltimore, Richmond, and other slaveholding cities will not, we imagine, form a very flattering opinion of the products of southern forests. Let it be remembered that nearly all the clippers, steamers, and small crafts are built in the North, that large cargoes of eastern lumber are exported to foreign countries, that 9/10 of the wooden ware used in the southern states is manufactured in New England, that in outrageous disregard of the natural rights and claims of southern mechanics, the markets of the South are forever filled with northern furniture, vehicles, axe, helves, walking canes, yardsticks, clothespins, and pen holders, that the extraordinary number of factories, steam engines, forges, and machine shops in the free states require an extraordinary quantity of cordwood, that a large majority of the magnificent edifices and other structures, both private and public, in which timber in its various forms is extensively used, are to be found in the free states, we say, let all these things be remembered, and the truth will at once flash across the mind that the forests of the North are a source of far greater income than those of the South. A side note, as Helper is writing this, there are no reliable roads into Appalachia. There are no roads in many parts of Mississippi or Texas, and thus huge stands of timber are there. It's just they do not have a way to bring them to market. So that's what he's talking about here. Andrew Jackson in 1830 had vetoed the Maysville Road Bill, which was about a road near Maysville, Kentucky. And after that, the precedent most Democrats applied here was that it's a states' rights issue to build roads, and thus the federal government shouldn't build a single road. Thus, ironically, at the time, most of the road building before that had been in the North, not in the South, because much of the South was unsettled. And so by the time the government changed their plans, it left the South without many roads. So that's really what's going on here. The difference is simply this. At the North, everything is turned to advantage. When a tree is cut down, the main body is sold or used for lumber, railing, or paling, the stump for matches and shoe pegs, the knees for shipbuilding, and the branches for fuel. At the South, everything is either neglected or mismanaged. Whole forests are felled by the ruthless hand of slavery. The trees are cut into logs, rolled into heaps, covered with the limbs and brush, and then burned on the identical soil that gave them birth. The land itself next falls a prey to the fell destroyer, and that which was once beautiful, fertile, and luxuriant woodland is soon despoiled of all of its treasures and converted into an eye-offending desert. Were we to go beneath the soil and collect all the mineral and lapidarious wealth of the free states, we should find it so much greater than the corresponding wealth of those slave states that no ordinary combination of figures would suffice to express the difference, to say nothing of the gold and quicksilver of California, the iron and coal of Pennsylvania, the copper of Michigan, the lead of Illinois, or the salt of New York. The marble and freestone quarries of New England are, incredible as it may seem to those unacquainted with the facts, far more important sources of revenue than all the subterranean deposits of the slave states. From the most reliable statistics within our reach, we are led to the inference that the total value of all the precious metals, rocks, minerals, and medicinal waters annually extracted from the bowels of the free states is not less than $85 million. The whole value of the same substance annually brought up from beneath the surface of the slave states does not exceed $12 million. In this respect, to what is our poverty ascribable? To the same cause that has impoverished and dishonored us in all other respects, the thriftless and degrading institution of slavery. Nature has been kind to us in all things. The strata and substrata of the South are profusely enriched with gold and silver and precious stones, and from the natural orifices and aqueducts in Virginia and North Carolina flow the purest healing waters in the world. But of what avail is all this latent wealth? Of what avail will it ever be, as long as slavery is permitted to play the dog in the manger? To these queries there can be but one reply: slavery must be suppressed. The South, so great and glorious by nature, must be reclaimed from her infamy and degradation. Our cities, fields, and forests must be kept intact from the unsparing monster. The various and ample resources of our vast domain, subterraneous as well as superficial, must be developed and made to contribute to our pleasures and to the necessities of the world. A very significant chapter, and one particularly pertinent to many of the preceding pages, might be written on the decline of agriculture in the slave states, but as the press of other subjects admonishes us to be concise upon this subject, we shall present only a few of the more striking instances. In the first place, let us compare the crops of wheat and rye in Kentucky in 1850 with the corresponding crops of the same state in 1840, after which we will apply a similar rule of comparison to 2 or 3 other slave-holding states. In Kentucky, the crop of 1840 of wheat and buss, 4,803,152. Rye buss, 1,321,373. 1850, 2,142,822. Rye bus, 415,073. And it said there's a decrease in the wheat and bus over 2,660,330. Decrease in the rye of 906,800. In Tennessee, the crop of 1840 wheat, 4,569,692. In 1850, 1,619,886, a decrease of 2,950,306. Tobacco, 29,550,432 in 1840. 20,148,932 in 1850, a decrease of 9,401,500 pounds. Virginia, crop of 1840 rye, 1,482,799. Crop of 1850, 458,930, a decrease of 1,023,869. Tobacco, in 1840, 75,347,106. In 1850, 56,803,227, a decrease of 18,543,879 pounds. In Alabama, the wheat crop of 1840, 838,052. By 1850, 294,044, a decrease of 544,008. Rye, 51,000 in 1840, 17,261 in 1850, a decrease of 33,739. The story of these figures is too intelligible to require words of explanation. We shall therefore drop this part of our subject and proceed to compile a couple of tables that will exhibit on a single page the wealth, revenue, and expenditure of the several states of the Confederacy. Let it be distinctly understood, however, that the compilation of these tables, 3,204,313 Negroes are valued as personal property and credited to the southern states as if they were so many horses and asses or bridles and blankets, and that no monetary valuation, whether is placed on any creature of any age, color, sex, or condition that bears the upright form of man in the free states. And on page 80, it has a whole entire wealth thing, and it basically, at the end of that, it says, entire wealth of the free states, I think it says here, 4,102,172,108. Entire wealth of the slave states, including slaves, 2,936,090,737. Balance in favor of the free states, 1,166,081,371. What a towering monument to the beauty and glory of free labor. What evidence of the unequaled efficacy and grandeur of free institutions. These figures are indeed too full of meaning to be passed by without comment. The two tables from which they are borrowed are at least a volume within themselves, and after all the pains we have taken to compile them, we shall perhaps feel somewhat disappointed if the reader fails to avail himself of the important information they impart. Human life in all ages has been made up of a series of adventures and experiments, and even at this stage of the world's existence, we are almost as destitute of a perfect rule of action, secular or religious, as were the erratic contemporaries of Noah. It is true, however, that we have made some progress in the right direction, and as it seems to be the tendency of the world to correct itself, we may suppose that future generations will be enabled by institution to discriminate between the true and the false, the good and the bad, and that with the development of this faculty of the mind, error and discord will begin to wane and finally cease to exist. Of all the experiments that have been tried by the people in America, slavery has proved the most fatal, and sooner that it is abolished, the better it will be for us, for posterity, and for the world. One of the evils resulting from it, and that not the least, apparent the figures above. Indeed, the unprofitableness of slavery is a monstrous evil when considered in all its bearings. It makes us poor, poverty makes us ignorant, ignorance makes us wretched, wretchedness makes us wicked, and wickedness leads to the devil. Ignorance is the curse of God, knowledge the wing wherewith we fly to heaven. Facts truly astounding are disclosed in the two last tables, and we could heartily wish that every intelligent American would commit them to memory. The total value of all the real and personal property of the free states, with an area of only 612,597 square miles, is $1,166,081,371 greater than the total value of all the real and personal property, including the price of 3,204,313 Negroes of the slave states, which have an area of 851,508 square miles. But extraordinary as the difference is in favor of the North, it is much less than the true account. On the authority of Southerns themselves, it is demonstrable beyond the possibility of refutation that the intrinsic value of all the property in the free states is more than 3 times greater than the intrinsic value of all the property in the slave states. James Madison, a Southern man, 4th President of the United States, a most correct thinker and one of the greatest statesmen the country has ever produced, thought it wrong to admit the idea there could be property in man, and we endorse to the fullest extent this opinion of the profound editor of the Federalist. We shall not recognize property in man. The slaves of the South are not worth a groat in any civilized community. No man of genuine decency and refinement would hold them as property on any terms. In the eyes of all enlightened nations and individuals, they are men, not merchandise. Southern pro-slavery politicians, some of whom have not hesitated to buy and sell their own sons and daughters, boast that the slaves of the South are worth $1,600 millions, and we have seen the amount estimated as high as $2,000 million. Mr. DeBow, the Southern Superintendent of the 7th Census, informs us that the value of all the property in the slave states, real and personal, including slaves, was in 1850 only $2,936,090,737, while according to the same authority, the value of all the real and personal property in the free states, genuine property that is everywhere recognized as property, was at the same time $4,102,172,108. Now all we have to do in order to ascertain the real value of all the property of the South, independent of Negroes, whose value, if valuable at all, is of a local and precarious character, is to subtract from the sum total of Mr. DeBow's return to the entire wealth of the slave states to the estimated value of the slaves themselves, and then by deducting the difference from the intrinsic value of all the property in the free states, we shall have the exact amount of the overplus of wealth in the glorious land of free soil, free labor, free speech, free presses, and free schools. And now to the task. Entire wealth of the slave states, including slaves, $2,936,090,737. Estimated value of slaves, $1,600,000,000. True wealth of the slave states would be $1,336,090,737. True wealth of the free states, $4,102,172,108. True wealth of the slave, $1,336,090,737. Balance in favor of the free states, $2,766,081,371. There, friends of the South and of the North, you have the conclusion of the whole matter. Liberty and slavery are before you. Choose which you will have. As for us, in the memorable language of the immortal Henry, we say, give us liberty or give us death. In the great struggle for wealth that has been going on between the two rival systems of free and slave labor, the balance above exhibits the net profits of the former. The struggle on the one side has been calm, laudable, and eminently successful. On the other, it has been attended by tumult, unmutterable cruelties, and disgraceful failures. We have given the slave drivers every conceivable opportunity to vindicate their domestic policy, but for them to do it is a moral impossibility. Less than 3/4 of a century ago, say in 1789, for that was about the average time of the abolition of slavery in the northern states, the South, with advantages in soil, climate, rivers, harbors, minerals, forests, and indeed almost every other natural resource, began an even race with the North in all the important pursuits of life, and now in the brief space of scarce 70 years and 10, we find her completely distanced, enervated, dejected, and dishonored. Slave drivers are the sole authors of her disgrace. As they have sown, so let them reap. As we have seen above, a careful and correct inventory of all the real and personal property in the two grand divisions of the country discloses with the astounding fact that in 1850 the free states were worth precisely $2,796,081,371 more than the slave states. $2,766 million of dollars. Think of it. What a vast and desirable sum, and how much better off the South would be with it than without it. Such is the enormous amount out of which slavery has defrauded us during the space of 61 years, from 1789 to 1850, being an average of about $45,350,000 per annum. During the last 25 or 30 years, however, our annual losses have been far greater than they were formerly. There has been a gradual increase every year, and now the ratio of increase is almost incredible. No patriotic Southerner can become conversant with the facts without experiencing a feeling of alarm and indignation. Until the North abolished slavery, she had no advantage of us whatsoever. The South was more than her equal in every respect. But no sooner had she gotten rid of hampering and pernicious institution than she began to absorb our wealth, and is now confidently believed that the merchant and Negro driving pleasure seekers of the South annually pour $120 million of dollars into her coffers in the North. Taking into account, then, the probable amount of money that has been drawn from the South and invested in the North within the last 6 years, and adding it to the grand balance above, the net profits of the North up to 1850, it may safely be assumed that in the present year of grace, 1857, the free states are worth at least $3,400 million of dollars more than the slave states. Let him who dares gainsay these remarks and calculations. No truthful tongue will deny them. No honorable pen can controvert them. One more word now as to the valuations of Negroes. Were our nature so degraded, or our conscience so elastic as to permit us to set a price upon men as we would set a price upon cattle and corn, we should be content to abide by the appraisement of the slaves of the South, and we would then enter into a calculation to ascertain the value of foreigners in the North. Not long since it was declared in the South that one free laborer is equal to 5 slaves, and there are 2,500,000 Europeans in the free states, all of whom are free laborers. We might bring Southern authority to back us in estimating that their value at $6,200 million, a handsome sum wherewithal to offset the account of $1,600 million brought forward as the value of Southern slaves. It is obvious, therefore, that if we were disposed to follow the barbarian example of the traffickers in human flesh, we could prove the North vastly richer than the South in bone and sinew, to say nothing of mind and morals, which shall receive our attention hereafter. The North has just as good a right to appraise the Irish immigrant as the South has to set a price on the African slave. But as it would be wrong to do either, we shall do neither. It is not our business to think of man as a merchantable commodity, and we will not even by implication admit that the wild and guilty fantasy that the condition of chattelhood may rightfully attach to sentient and immortal beings. In this connection, we would direct the special attention of the reader to the following eloquent passage exhibiting the philosophy of the free and slave labor from the facile pen of the editor of the North American and United States Gazette. In the very nature of things, the freeman must produce more than the slave. There is no conclusion of science more certain. Under a system which gives to the laboring man the fruit of his toil, there is every motive to render him diligent and assiduous. If he relies on being employed by others, his wages rise with the reputation of industry, skill, and faithfulness. And as the owner of the soil, there is every assurance that he will do what he can to cultivate it to the best advantage and develop its latent wealth. Self-interest will call forth what powers of intellect and invention he has to aid him in his work and employ his physical strength to the greatest possible advantage. Free labor receives an immediate reward which cheers and invigorates it, and above all it has that chief spring of exertion, hope, whose bow always expands the heaven before it. It has inviolate hearth, it has a home. But it looks forward to a still better condition, to a brighter prospect in the future to which its efforts all contribute. The children in such a household are the chief inducements to serve the arm of labor, that they may be properly cared for, fed, clothed, educated, accomplished, instructed in some useful and honorable calling, and provided for when they shall go out upon the world. All its sentiments, religious and otherwise, all its affections for parents and kindred, all its tastes are so many impelling and stimulating forces. It is disposed to read, to ornament its home, to travel, to enjoy social intercourse, and to attain these ends. It rises to higher exertions and a stricter economy of time. It explores every path of employment and is therefore in the highest degree productive. How different it is of slave labor. The slave toils for another, not for himself. Whether he does little or much, whether his work is well or ill performed, he has a subsistence, nothing less, nothing more. And why should he toil beyond necessity? He cannot accumulate any property for the decline of his years, or leave to his children when he is departed. Nay, he cannot toil to better the present condition of his children. They belong to another, and not to him. He cannot supply his hut with comforts, or embellish it with the adornments of taste. He does not read, he does not journey for pleasure. Inducements to exertion he has none, that he may adapt himself to his condition and enjoy the present hour. He deadens those aspirations that he must always be baffled in his case and sink down into ease and sensuality. His mind is unlighted and untutored, dark with ignorance. Among those who value him, he is proverbially indolent, thievish, and neglectful of his master's interests. It is common for even the advocates of slavery to declare that one freeman is worth half a dozen slaves. With every cord to exertion thus sundered, the mind benighted, the man nearly lost in the animal, it requires no deep philosophy to see why labor cannot be near so productive as it would be were these conditions all reversed. Though ever so well directed by the superior skill and urged forward by the strong arm of the master, slave labor is necessarily a blight to the soil. Sterility follows in its steps and not afar off. What a difference, plain and heaven-wide, between the outward and interior life of a slave and a free community, resulting directly and palpably from the difference in its labor. The cottage home amid trees and shrubbery, its apartments well adorned and furnished, books on the shelves, and the passing literature of the day scattered around, The few, perhaps, but well-tilled acres belonging to the man who tills them, the happy children with sunny prospects, the frequent school, the church arrayed with beauty, the thriving handsome village, the flourishing cities and prosperous marts of the trade, the busy factories, railroads, traffic, travel, where free labor tills the ground. How beautiful it all is in contrast to the forlorn and dreary aspects of a country tilled by slaves. The villages of such a country are mainly groups of miserable huts. Its comparatively few churches are often dilapidated and unsightly. The common schoolhouse, the poor man's college, is hardly known, showing how little interest is felt in the chief treasures of the state, the immortal minds of the multitude who are not born to wealth. The signs of premature old age are visibly impressed upon everything that meets the eye. The fields present a dreary monotony. Everywhere you see lands that are worn out, barren, and deserted in consequence of slave tillage, left for more fertile lands and newer regions, which are also in their turn to be smitten with sterility and forsaken. The free community may increase its population almost without limit. The capacity of slave countries to sustain a population is soon at an end, and then it diminishes. In all the elements of essential prosperity, and all that elevates man, how striking the contrast between the region that is tilled by slave and the region that is tilled by free labor. For the purpose of showing what Virginia, once the richest, most populous, and most powerful of the states, has become under the blight of slavery, we shall now introduce an extract from one of the speeches delivered by Henry A. Wise during the last gubernatorial campaign in that degraded commonwealth. Addressing a Virginia audience in language as graphic as it is truthful, he says, "Commerce has long ago spread her sails and sailed away from you. You have not as yet dug more than coal enough to warm yourselves at your own hearths. You have set no tilt-hammer of Vulcan to strike blows worthy of gods in your iron foundries. You have not yet spun more than coarse cotton enough in the way of manufactures to clothe your own slaves. You have no commerce, no mining, no manufactures. You have relied alone on the single power of agriculture, and such agriculture. Your sedge patches outshine the sun. Your inattention to your only source of wealth has seared the very bosom of Mother Earth. Instead of having to feed cattle on 1,000 hills, you have had to chase the stump-tailed deer through the sedge patches to procure a tough beef steak. The present conditions of things has existed too long in Virginia. The landlord has skinned the tenant, and the tenant has skinned the land until all have grown poor together." With tears in his eyes and truth on his lips, for the first time after an interval of 20 years, the Richmond Enquirer helps to paint a melancholy picture. In 1852, that journal thus bewailed the condition of Virginia. "We have cause to feel deeply for our situation. Philadelphia herself contains a population far greater than the whole free population of Eastern Virginia. The little state of Massachusetts has an aggregate wealth exceeding that of Virginia by more than $126 million. Just a score of years before these words were penned, the same paper, then edited by the elder Ritchie, made a most earnest appeal to the intelligence and patriotism of Virginia to adopt an effectual measure for the speedy overthrow of the damnable institution of human bondage. Here is an extract from an article which appeared in its editorial column under the date of January 7th, 1832. This is after the Nat Turner Rebellion, by the way. "Something must be done, and it is the part of no honest man to deny it, of no free press to affect to conceal it. When this dark population is growing upon us, when every new census is but gathering its appalling numbers upon us, when we, within a period equal to that in which this federal constitution has been in existence, those numbers will increase to more than 2 million within Virginia. When our sister states are closing their doors upon our blacks for sale, and when our whites are moving westwardly in greater numbers than we like to hear of, when this, the fairest land on all this continent for soil, climate, and situation combined, might become a sort of a garden spot if it were worked by the hands of white men alone, can we ought we to sit down quietly, fold our arms, and say to each other, well, this thing will not come to the worst in our days. We will leave it to our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to take care of themselves and to brave the storm? Is this to act like wise men? Mean, sure, but gradual, systematic, but discreet, ought to be adopted for reducing the mass of evil which is pressing upon the South, and will still more press upon her the longer it is put off. We say now, in the utmost sincerity of our hearts, that our wisest men cannot give too much of their attention to this subject, nor can they give it too soon. Better abolition doctrine than this is seldom heard. Why did not the Inquirer continue to preach it? What potent influence hushed its clarion voice just as it began to be lifted in behalf of a liberal policy and an enlightened humanity? Had Mr. Ritchie continued to press the truth home to the hearts of the people as he should have done, Virginia, instead of being worth only $392 million in 1850, Negroes and all, would have been worth at least $800 million in genuine property, and if the state had emancipated her slaves at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, the last census would no doubt have reported her wealth incorrectly at a sum exceeding $1,000 million. Listen now to the statement of a momentous fact. The value of all the property, real and personal, including slaves, in 7 slave states, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, Florida, and Texas, is less than the real and personal estates, which is unquestionable property in the single state of New York. Nay, worse, if 8 entire slave states, Arkansas, Delaware, Florida, Maryland, Missouri, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Texas, and the District of Columbia, with all their hordes of human merchandise, were put up at auction, New York could buy them all and then have $133 million left in her pocket. Such is the amazing contrast between freedom and slavery, even in a pecuniary point of view. When we come to compare the North with the South in regards to literature, general intelligence, inventive genius, moral and religious enterprises, the discoveries in medicine, and the progress in the arts and sciences, we shall in every instance find the contrast equally great on the side of liberty. It gives us no pleasure to say hard things of the Old Dominion, the mother of Washington, Jefferson, Henry, and other illustrious patriots, who, as we shall prove hereafter, were genuine abolitionists, but the policy which she has pursued has been so utterly inexcusable, so unjust to the non-slave-holding whites, so cruel to the Negroes, and so disregard the rights of humanity at large that it becomes the duty of everyone who makes allusion to her history to expose her follies, crimes, and her poverty, and publish every fact of whatever nature that would be instrumental in determining others to eschew her bad example. She has willfully departed from the faith of the founders of the Republic. She has not only turned a deaf ear to the counsel of wise men from other states in the Union, but she has, in like manner, ignored the teaching of the great warriors and statesmen who have sprung from her own soil. In a subsequent chapter, we expect to show that all or nearly all of the distinguished Virginians whose bodies have been consigned to the grave, but whose names have been given to history, and whose memoirs have a place in the hearts of their countrymen, were the friends and advocates of universal freedom, that they were inflexibly opposed to the extension of slavery into the territories, devised measures for the restriction, and with hopeful anxiety looked forward to the time when it should be eradicated from the states themselves. With them, the rescue of our country from British domination and the establishment of the general government upon a firm basis were considerations of paramount importance. They supposed, and no doubt earnestly desired, that the states in their sovereign capacities would soon abolish an institution which was so palpably in conflict with the principles enunciated in the Declaration of Independence. Indeed, it would seem that among the framers of that immortal document and its equally immortal sequel, the Constitution of the United States, there was a tacit understanding to this effect, and the northern states, true to their implied faith, abolished it within a short period after our national independence had been secured. Not so with the South. She has pertinaciously refused to perform her duty. She has apostatized from the faith of her great men, and even at this very moment repudiates the secret principles that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is evident, therefore, that the free states are the only members of this confederacy that have established republican forms of government based upon the theories of Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Henry, and other eminent statesmen of Virginia. The greatest revolutionary movement, which was set on foot in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, on the 20th day of May, 1775, has not yet been terminated, nor will it be until every slave in the United States is freed from the tyranny of his master. Every victim of the vile institution, whether white or black, must be reinvested with the sacred rights and privileges of which he has been deprived by an inhuman oligarchy. What noble sires of the Revolution left unfinished, it is our duty to complete. They did all that true valor and patriotism could accomplish. Not one iota did they swerve from their plighted faith, the self-sacrificing spirit which they envisaged will command the applause of every succeeding age, not in vindication of their own personal rights merely, but of the rights of humanity, not for their own generation and age simply, but for all ages, to the end of time they gave their toil, treasure, and their blood, nor deemed them all too great a price to pay for the establishment of so comprehensive and beneficent a principle. Let their posterity emulate their courage and their zeal, and especially remember that it is the duty of every existing generation so to provide for its individual interests as to confer superior advantages on that which is to follow. To this principle the North has adhered with the strictest fidelity. How has it been with the South? Has she imitated the praiseworthy example of our illustrious ancestors? No, she has treated it with the utmost contempt. She has been extremely selfish, so selfish, indeed, that she has robbed posterity of its natural rights. From the period of the formation of government down to the present moment, her policy has been downright suicidal and, as a matter of course, wholly indefensible. She has hugged the viper to her breast. Her whole system has been paralyzed, her conscience is seared, and she is becoming callous to every principle of justice and magnanimity. Except among the non-slaveholders, who, besides being kept in the grossest ignorance and are under the restraint of all manners of iniquitous laws, patriotism has ceased to exist within her borders. And here we desire to be distinctly understood, for we shall have occasion to refer to this matter again. We repeat, therefore, that the substance of our averment, that at this day there is not a grain of patriotism in the South except among the non-slaveholders. Subsequent pages shall testify to the truth of this assertion. Here and there it is true that a slaveholder disgusted with the institution has become ashamed of himself, emancipated his Negroes, and enters upon the walks of an honorable life. But these cases are exceedingly rare and do not in any manner disprove the general correctness of our remark. All persons who do not voluntarily manumit their slaves, as mentioned above, are undeniably actuated by principles of pure patriotism, justice, and humanity, and so believing we delight to them to do the honor. One more to the Old Dominion. At her door we lay the bulk of the evil of slavery. The first African sold in America was sold on the James River in that state on the 20th of August, 1620, and although the institution was fastened upon her and the other colonies by the mother country, she was the first to perceive its blighting and degrading influences. Her wise men were the first to denounce it, and after the British power was overthrown at Yorktown, she should have been the first to abolish it. 57 years ago, she was the Empire State. Now, with half a dozen other slaveholding states thrown into the scale with her, she is still far inferior to New York, which at the time Cornwallis surrendered his sword to Washington was less than half her equal. Had she obeyed the counsels of the good, the great, and the wise men of our nation, especially her own incomparable sons, the extendable elements of slavery would have been promptly arrested, and the virgin soil of 9 southern states, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Missouri, Arkansas, Florida, and Texas, would all have been saved from its horrid pollutions. Confined to the original states in which it existed, the institution would have soon been disposed of by legislative enactments, and long before the present day by a gradual process that could have shocked no interest and alarm, no prejudice, We should have rid ourselves not only of African slavery, which is an abomination and curse, but also of the Negroes themselves, who in our judgment, whether viewed in relation to their actual characteristics and conditions or through the strong antipathies of the whites, are, to say the least, an undesirable population. This, then, is the grounds of our expostulation with Virginia, that, in stubborn disregard of the advice and friendly warnings of Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Henry, and a host of other distinguished patriots who sprang from her soil, patriots whose voices shall be heard before we finish our task, and in utter violation of every principle of justice and humanity, she still persists in fostering an institution which is so manifestly detrimental to her vital interests. Every Virginian, whether living or dead, whose name is an honor to his country, has placed on record his abhorrence of slavery, and in doing so has borne testimony to the blight and degradation that everywhere follows its course. One of the best abolition speeches we have ever read was delivered in the Virginia House of Delegates, January 20th, 1832, by Charles James Faulkner, who still lives, and who has, we understand, generously emancipated several of his slaves and sent them to Liberia. Here follows an extract from his speech. Let Southern politicians read it attentively and imbibe a moiety of the spirit of patriotism which it breathes. Sir, I am gratified to perceive that no gentleman has yet risen in this hall, the avowed advocate of slavery. The day has gone by when such a voice could be listened to with patience or even with forbearance. I even regret, sir, that we should find those amongst us who enter the lists of discussion as its apologists, except alone upon the ground of uncontrollable necessity, and yet who could have listened to the very eloquent remarks of the gentleman from Brunswick without being forced to conclude that he at least considered slavery, however, not to be defended upon principle, yet as being divested of much of its enormity as you approach it in practice. Sir, if there be one who concurs with that gentleman in the harmless character of the institution, let me request him to compare the condition of the slaveholding portion of this commonwealth, barren, desolate, and seared, as if it were by the avenging hand of heaven, with the descriptions which we have of this country from those who first broke its virgin soil. To what is this change ascribable? Alone to the withering and blasting effects of slavery. If this does not satisfy him, request him to extend his travels to the northern states of the Union, and beg him to contrast the happiness and contentment which prevail throughout that country, the busy and cheerful sound of industry, the rapid and swelling growth of their population, their means and institutions of education, their skill and proficiency in the useful arts, their enterprise and public spirit, the monuments of their commercial and manufacturing industry, and above all, their devoted attachment to the government from which they derive their protection, with the derision, discontent, indolence, and poverty of the southern country. To what, sir, is all of this ascribable? To that vice in the organization of society by which one half of its inhabitants are arrayed in interest and feeling against the other half. To that unfortunate state of society which freemen regard labor as disgraceful and slaves shrink from it as a burden tyrannically imposed upon them, to that condition of things which 500,000 of your population can feel no sympathy with the society in the prosperity of which they are forbidden to participate, and no attachment to a government at whose hands they receive nothing but injustice. If this should not be sufficient, and the curious and incredulous inquirer should suggest that the contrast which has been adverted to, and which is so manifest, might be traced to a difference of climate or other causes distinct from slavery itself, permit me to refer him to the two states of Kentucky and Ohio. No difference of soil, no diversity of climate, no diversity in the original settlement of these two states can account for the remarkable disproportion of their natural advancement. Separated by a river alone, they seem to have been purposely and providentially designed to exhibit in their future histories the difference which necessarily results from a country free from and a country afflicted with the curse of slavery. Vain and idle is every attempt to strangle this inquiry. As well might you attempt to chain the ocean or stay the avenging thunderbolts of heaven as to drive the people from any inquiry which may result in their better condition. This is too deep, too engrossing a subject of consideration. It addresses itself too strongly to our interests, to our passions, and our feelings. I shall advocate no scheme that does not respect the right of property, so far as it is entitled to be respected, with a just regard to the safety and resources of the state. I would approach the subject as one of great magnitude and delicacy, as one whose varied and momentous consequences demand the calmest and most deliberate investigation. But still, sir, I would approach it. Delicate as it may be, encompassed as it may be with difficulties and hazards, I would still approach it. The people demand it. Their security requires it. In the language of the wise and prophetic Jefferson, you must approach it. You must bear it. You must adopt some plan of emancipation, or worse will follow. Mr. Curtis, in a speech in the Virginia legislature in 1832, said, "There is a malaria in the atmosphere of these regions, which the newcomer shuns as being deleterious to his views and habits. See the wide-spreading ruin which the avarice of our ancestral government has produced in the South, is witnessed in a sparse population of freemen, deserted habitations, and fields without culture. Strange to tell, even the wolf, driven back long since by the approach of man, now returns after the lapse of 100 years to howl over the desolations of slavery." Mr. Moore, also a member of the legislature of Virginia, and speaking of the evils of slavery, said, "The first I shall mention is the irresistible tendency which it has to undermine and destroy everything like virtue and morality in the community. If we look back through the long course of time which has elapsed since the creation of the present moment, we shall scarcely be able to point out a people whose situation was not in many respects preferable to our own, and that of the other states in which Negro slavery exists. In that part of the state below the tidewater, the whole face of the country wears an appearance of almost utter desolation, distressing to the beholder. The very spot on which our ancestors landed a little more than 200 years ago appears to be on the eve of again becoming the haunt of wild beasts." Mr. Rives of Campbell County said, "On the multiplied and desolating evils of slavery, he was not disposed to say much. The curse and deteriorating consequences were within the observation and experience of the members of the House and the people of Virginia, and it did not seem to him that there could be two opinions about it." Mr. Powell said, "I can scarcely persuade myself that there is a solitary gentleman in the House who will not readily admit that slavery is an evil, and that its removal, if practicable, is a consummation most devoutly to be wished. I have not heard, nor do I expect to hear, a voice raised in this hall to the contrary." In the language of another, we might multiply extracts almost indefinitely from Virginia authorities, testifying to the blight and degradation that have overtaken the Old Dominion in every department of her affairs. Her commerce gone, her agriculture decaying, her land falling in value, her mining and manufacturing nothing, her schools dying out. She presents, according to the testimony of her own sons, the saddest of all pictures, that of a sinking and dying state. Every year leaves her in a worse condition than it found her, and it is with Virginia, so it is with the entire South. In the terse language of Governor Wise, all have grown poor together. The black god of slavery, which the South has worshipped for 237 years, is but a devil in disguise, and if we would save ourselves from being engulfed in utter ruin, we must repudiate this foul god for a purer deity and abandon his altars for a holier shrine. No time is to be lost. His fanatical adorers, the despotic adversaries of human liberty, are concocting schemes for the enslavement of all the laboring classes, irrespective of race or color. The issue is before us. We cannot evade it. We must meet it with firmness and with unflinching valor. What it was that paralyzed the tongues of all those members of the Virginia legislature who at the session of 1831-32 distinguished themselves by advocating a system of emancipation is a mystery that has never yet been solved. Whether any or all of them shared a division of spoils with a certain newspaper editor, we have no means of knowing, but if all accounts are to be true, there was consummated in Richmond in the latter part of the year 1832 one of the blackest schemes of bribery and corruption that was ever perpetrated in this or any other country. We are assured, however, that one thing is certain, and that is this. The Negro population of Virginia was very considerably and suddenly decreased by forcible immigration. that a large gang was driven further south, sold, and the proceeds divided among certain renegades and traitors who, Judas-like, had agreed to serve the devil for a price. We would fain avoid all personalities and uncomplimentary allusions to the dead, but when men from love of lucre, from mere selfish motives, or from sheer turpitude of heart, inflict great injuries and outrages on the public, their villainy ought to be exposed so that others may be deterred from following in their footsteps. As a general rule, man's moral nature is, we believe, so strong that it invariably prompts him to eschew vice and practice virtue, in other words, to do right. But this rule, like all others, has its exceptions, as might be most strikingly illustrated in the character of blank blank and some half dozen or more of his pro-slavery coadjutors. From whose hand did this man receive $50,000 improperly, if not illegally, taken from the public funds in Washington? When did he receive it, and for what purpose? And who was the arch-demagogue through whose agency the transfer was made? He was an oligarchical member of the cabinet under Mr. Polk's administration in 1845, and the money was used, and who can doubt intended for the express purpose of establishing another Negro-driving journal to support the tottering fortunes of slavery. From the second volume of a valuable political work by a senator of 30 years, we make the following pertinent extract. The Globe was sold and was paid for, and how? Becomes a question of public concern to answer, for it was paid for out of public money, those same $50,000 which were removed to the village bank in the interior of Pennsylvania by a Treasury order on the 4th of November, 1844. 3 annual installments made the payment, and the Treasury did not reclaim the money for these 3 years, and though traveling through tortuous channels, the sharp-sighted Mr. Rives traced the money back to its starting point from that deposit. Besides, Mr. Cameron, who had control of the village bank, admitted before a committee of Congress that he had furnished money for the payments, an admission which the obliging committee, on request, left out of their report. Mr. Robert J. Walker was Secretary of the Treasury during these 3 years, and the conviction was absolute among the close observer of the course of things that he was the prime contriver and zealous manager of the arrangements which displaced Mr. Blair and installed Mr. Ritchie. Thus, if we are to believe Mr. Benton in his 30 years' view, and we are disposed to regard him as a good authority, the Washington Union was brought into existence under the peculiar auspices of the ostensible editor of the Richmond Enquirer, and that 2 papers fathered by the same individual have gone hand in hand for the last 12 or 13 years, the shameless advocates and defenders of human bondage. To suppose that either has been sustained by fairer means than it was commenced with would be wasting imagination on a great improbability. Both have uniformly and pertinaciously opposed every laudable enterprise that the white non-slaveholders projected. Indeed, so unmitigated has been their hostility to all manual pursuits in which their stupid and vulgar slaves cannot be employed to advantage, and if there is any occupation under the sun in which they can be employed to good advantage, we know not what it is, that it is an extremely difficult matter to find a respectable merchant, mechanic, manufacturer, or businessman of any calling whatever within the bonds of their circulation. We have been credibly informed by a gentleman from Powhatan County, Virginia, that in the year 1836 or 37, or about that time, the Honorable Abbott Lawrence of Boston, backed by his brother Amos and other millionaires of New England, went down to Richmond with the sole view of reconnoitering the manufacturing facilities of that place, fully determined, if pleased, with the water power to erect a large number of cotton mills and machine shops. He had been in the capital of Virginia only a day or two before he discovered, much to his gratification, that nature had shaped everything to his liking. And as he was a businessman who transacted business in a businesslike manner, he lost no time making preliminary arrangements for the consummation of his noble purpose. His mission was one of peace and promise. Others were to share the benefits of his laudable and concerted scheme. Thousands of poor boys and girls in Virginia, instead of growing up in extreme poverty and ignorance, or of having to immigrate to the free states of the West, were to have avenues of profitable employment open to them at home. Thus, they would be enabled to earn an honest and reputable living, to establish and sustain free schools, free libraries, free lectures, and free presses to become useful and exemplary members of society, and to die fit candidates for heaven. The magnanimous New Englander was in ecstasies with the prospect that opened before him. Individually, so far as mere money was concerned, he was perfectly independent. His industry and economy in early life had secured him the ownership and control of an ample fortune. With the aid of 11 other men, each equal to himself, he could have bought the whole city of Richmond, Negroes and all, though it is not to be presumed that he would have disgraced his name by becoming a trader in human flesh. But he was not selfish. Unlike the arrogant and illiberal slaveholder, he did not regard himself as the center around whom everybody else should revolve. On the contrary, he was a genuine philanthropist, while with shrewdness that will command the admiration of every practical businessman, he engaged in nothing that did not swell the dimensions of his own purse, but was yet always solicitous to invest his capital in a manner calculated to promote the interests of those around him. Nor was he satisfied with simply furnishing the means whereby his less fortunate neighbors were to become prosperous, intelligent, and contented. With his generous heart and sagacious mind, he delighted to aid them in making a judicious application of his wealth to their own use. Moreover, as a member of society, he felt that the community had some reasonable claims upon him, and he made it obligatory on himself constantly to devise plans and exert his personal efforts for public good. Such was the character of the distinguished manufacturer who honored Richmond with his presence 19 or 20 years ago. Such was the character of the man whom he represented, and such were the grand designs which they sought to accomplish. To the enterprising and moneyed descendants of the Pilgrim Fathers, it was a matter of little astonishment that the immense water power of Richmond had been so long neglected. He expressed his surprise to a number of Virginians, and was at a loss to know why they had not long prior to the period of his visit amongst them availed themselves of the powerful element that is eternally gushing and foaming over the falls of the James River. Innocent man, he was utterly unconscious of the fact that he was interfering with the beloved institutions of the South, and little was he prepared to withstand the terrible denunciations that were immediately showered on his head through the columns of the Richmond Enquirer. Few words will suffice to tell the equal. The Negro-worshipping sheet, whose hireling policy for the last 24 years have been to support the worthless black slave and his tyrannical master at the expense of the free white laborer, wrote down the enterprise, and the noble son of New England, abused, insulted, and disgusted, quietly returned to Massachusetts and there employed his capital in building up the cities of Lowell and Lawrence, either of which, in all those elements of material and social prosperity that make up the greatness of states, is already far in advance of the most important of all the seedy and squalid niggervilles in the Old Dominion. Such is an inkling of the infamous means that have been resorted to from time to time for the purpose of upholding and perpetuating in America the accursed institution of slavery. Having in view all the foregoing facts, we were not in the least surprised while walking through Hollywood Cemetery in the western suburbs of Richmond. Not long since, our companion, a Virginian of the true school, directed our attention to a monument of some pretensions and exclaimed, "There lie the remains of a man upon whose monument should be inscribed in everlasting prominence the finger of scorn pointed downward." The reader scarcely need to be told that we were standing at the tomb of blank blank, who, in the opinion of our friend, had, by concentrating within himself the views and purposes of all the evil spirits in Virginia, greatly retarded the abolition of slavery. That means prevented it. So greatly, indeed, as thereby to throw the state at least 50 years behind her free competitors of the Northeast and of the West. It is to be hoped that Virginia may never give birth to another man whose evil influence will so justly entitle him to the reprobation of posterity. How any rational man in this or any other country, with the astounding contrast between freedom and slavery ever looming in his view, can offer an apology for the existing statism of the South, is to us a most inexplicable mystery. Indeed, we cannot conceive it possible that the conscience of any man who is really sane would permit him to become the victim of such an egregious and diabolical absurdity. Therefore, at this period of our history, with the light of the past, the reality of the present, and the prospect of the future all so prominent and so palpable, We infer that every person who sets up an unequivocal defense of the institution of slavery must of necessity be either a fool, a knave, or a madman. It is much to be regretted that the slavocrats look at but one side of the question. Of all the fanatics in the country, they have of late become the most unreasonable and ridiculous. Let them deliberately view the subject of slavery in all its aspects and bearings, and if they are possessed of honest hearts and convincible minds, they will readily perceive the grossness of their past errors, renounce their allegiance to a cause so unjust and disgraceful,